Minister, the time for answering the question has expired. Senator McGrath.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Human Services, Senator Payne, representing the Minister for Trade and Investment. Can the minister inform the Senate how the government's free trade agreement with China will stimulate jobs and growth for all Australians?
We lost your microphone in the last few seconds of that, but I assume the minister heard the question. The Minister for Human Services, Senator Payne.
Mr President. Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator McGrath for that question. It is absolutely essential that this chapter agreement is implemented as soon as possible, Mr President. As one of our trifecta of trade agreements, which are with the major economies of North Asia, they are very, very powerful enablers for Australia, and they're part of this government's help to diversify our economy, as I've said before. In fact, just like our trade deals with Japan and Korea, which are already in operation, the benefits to Australian businesses and the people they employ will flow immediately, Mr President. So CHAFTA, if we implement it this year, Mr President, will result in a double bonus effect of tariff cuts for our exporters. One round of tariff cuts this year and a second round of tariff cuts in January 2016. This would result in literally hundreds of millions of dollars in tariff or tax relief for our exporters. And in fact, upon full implementation, some 95% of Australia's goods exports to China will enter China duty-free. That's why it's essential that those opposite support this deal and allow the benefits to flow immediately. And if they're not prepared to listen to it from me, Mr President, then it also explains why the agreement's been backed by Labor figures, by people like John Brumby, by Craig Emerson, by, as I've mentioned before, Mr President, the luminary Bruce Hawker. And if they're not good enough for them, Mr President, and I don't often quote Labor premiers, let me try with Daniel Andrews, the Premier of Victoria. It's very exciting to see the free trade agreement that for the first time takes a really bold step in terms of services, being able to have much greater access and a much bigger profile and presence in China for services offered, or at least led by Victorian companies and consortia, right out of Melbourne. A quote from Mr Daniel Andrews on January 13 this year, Mr President. He'd be the Labor Premier of Victoria, as I understand it. The Labor Premier of South Australia, Mr President. China is our largest trading partner. China is also our fastest-growing trading partner.
Minister.
This free trade agreement will give us the impetus to grow that trade opportunity further.
Senator McGrath, supplementary question.
Yes, Mr President, a supplementary. Can the minister inform the Senate of the cost to Australian industry if the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is not implemented by the end of this year? Which sectors stand to suffer if this landmark deal does not receive support?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thanks, Senator McGrath, for the supplementary. We have had the opportunity to identify some of the sectors, Mr President, which will suffer the most. But it's interesting to start with something like the financial services sector, Mr President, who warn that if stopped, if not progressed, the cost to our economy will be more than $4 billion and some 10,000 jobs in financial services alone by 2030. In agriculture, Mr President, the NFF has advised that delay will cost agriculture alone $300 million in 2016, in 1 year, with untold flow-on effects to rural and regional communities. And if nobody opposite cares about those, then those on this side most certainly do, and Senator McGrath in particular in relation to the rural and regional communities of Queensland, which will rely on the CHAFTA opening up opportunities for them. Failure to ratify, for example, will cost the red meat industry $100 million, dairy up to $60 million, wine up to $50 million and grains more than $43 million.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Senator McGrath,
supplementary, Mr President. Can the minister inform the Senate how the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement will benefit the small business sector and create jobs?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I think this is a very important point. These free trade agreements, Mr President, are not just about big business and that end of town. If you're a small business with a great product or a great service, e-commerce will give you a direct route into the world's major markets, including, of course, China, as a result of the CHAFTA itself. These FTAs translate into jobs and opportunities for everyday Australians. Let's take, for example,
Senator
the Kimberley
Whish-Wilson.
Campers owner, Bruce Loxton, up in Ballina. He's got big plans to export his caravans into China as a result of the FTA, directly as a result. Already applied to double the size of his premises and is hoping to add between 30 and 40 staff on the north coast of New South Wales. Under CHAFTA, he can do that because the 10% tariff on caravans will be eliminated. Won't only increase the competitiveness of his business, Kimberley Campers, but it will create new opportunities and new jobs for Australians, and
Thank
those
you,
opposite
Minister.
need to
The
support
time
us.
for answering the question has